Welcome back, listeners, to Diversion Insights. Today, my guest is Laura Iosue, but before we get that started, I want to thank our sponsor, IMI. IMI is an American medical device manufacturer specializing in devices that enhance the safety of medication from the pharmacy to the patient. Creating products for the compounding pharmacist is their sole focus. And as a result, their customers experience the quality, service, and value only a specialized partner can offer. Laura is an experienced litigator with 30 years of experience. Some of the areas of her practice are now focused on professional and attorney discipline and licensing and criminal defense. And as such, she works with healthcare professionals who have actions against their license. Diversion, falsifying records, etc. But she can tell us better what types of cases she sees, so I'm going to let her do that. Welcome, Laura. I am very much looking forward to our interview today. One is because I just love your personality, but two, I think you're going to give us insight and a different perspective on those who have a history of substance use disorder. So welcome, and I'm really looking forward to it. Start by telling us a little bit about you and why you transitioned into this type of law.
Well, I appreciate your kind words about my personality. I have learned that I am an acquired taste. Either people love me or they're like, oh my God, she's too much, but whatever, it's fine. I'm comfortable with that, but thank you for having me very much. So my history is I've been practicing, like you said, for 30 years, which I honestly can't believe, but I started off as a public defender. I had 2 years in Wisconsin right out of law school. I went to law school at DePaul in Chicago. 2 years in Wisconsin. Then when I got married, I came down here to Indianapolis. I was in the public defender office here for 2 years. From there, I went to, I had the PD office here. I did, started off in low-level felonies and then did major felonies. Then from there, I went to our Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission, which is the body in Indiana that investigates and prosecutes allegations of misconduct against lawyers. I was there for 13 years, and then I left there and I went to the Attorney General's office, where I was heading up the section, at first half of the medical section, and then over time it became the whole section. Doing the same thing that I did at the Disciplinary Commission, investigating and prosecuting allegations of misconduct against medical professionals. And there was a smattering of others and other professionals in there too. And so I was fortunate enough to lead that division and be able to train that division. So then I left there, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so I decided I was going to go out on my own. And so that's what I did. And now I defend attorneys and other licensed professionals when they do have an action against their license. And obviously, as your listeners know, there's very often crossover between a licensing action and criminal cases, unfortunately. I also do CHINs and TPR cases, which in Indiana is when DCS, Department of Child Services, is involved in a case. And then I also do, as a public defender contract, which I'm still very proud that I serve as a public defender, just as a contract. I represent those who are in jeopardy of civil commitment. So that's it. And Terry, listen, if I get a little too talky, stop me.
Okay. All right. No, all of that was great. So you kind of flip sides then, right? You went from,
sure,
yeah. Yeah.
Well, as I say, I feel like I kind of came home, right?
Okay.
And I started off doing criminal defense, and then I feel like I came home.
Okay. All right. And so what are you seeing being on that opposite sides of when it comes to a healthcare professional prosecuting and now you're defending?
So I think that the biggest thing that I knew, that I have learned, is that, no one as a child says, you know what, when I grow up, I'm going to be an addict. No one says that. No one says that. But something and I knew that before. I knew that when I was prosecuting cases, right? I mean, that seems obvious. But what I didn't know was the level, the depth, the pervasiveness, and the continuous trauma that people endure as children and then into their adulthood, and how that leads to substance use disorder. I had no idea. I mean, I grew up very fortunate. I grew up in suburban Chicago, and I had, my parents were married until I was like, 19, and we never lacked for anything, probably to the other end. And while I understand, I knew, right? I mean, obviously, if I originally went into the defense, I knew that, but boy, I just did not know. And
do you think if you had realized that earlier on, it would have made a difference when it came to the prosecution? I mean, obviously, that's your job. I mean, your side needs to win, right? I mean, that's why you're okay.
I absolutely disagree with that.
Okay.
I don't think your side needs to win. I think as lawyers, I might get myself in trouble with this, but sometimes you see young lawyers who that's their mentality.
Okay.
And I don't think that's what we're here to do as lawyers. I really don't. If I don't know if you ever went to my website, Terry, but I had an uncle who, when I was growing up, who was he was a lawyer in Elgin, Illinois, which is, not really small town, but whatever. He did a little bit of everything. And when I was either graduating law school or just after I passed the bar, he said to me, always remember there's more than one reason they call you counselor. And I have never forgotten that. I mean, never. And, early when I was a public defender, when that CBS show 48 Hours really was 48 hours in the life of whatever, they did one on New York public defenders. And I remember one of the practitioners there saying, I do this because if it's not me, it might not be somebody else. So there's a big part that is about just listening. And so when I was at the Attorney General's office, which I should say, in most states, for medical professionals, it is the board itself that has a staff of investigators who, when a consumer complaint comes in, they investigate the case and decide about whether or not they're going to prosecute it. In Indiana, it's not like that. In Indiana, the case a consumer complaint goes to the Attorney General. The Attorney General staff then investigates and makes a determination about whether a formal administrative complaint should be filed in front of the board. Okay. So when I was at the Attorney General's office over that division, I thought that our duty, we had 3 prongs that we had to do. The first was certainly to protect the public from an unsafe practitioner. But the second was to protect a practitioner from an unfounded grievance. And the third is sometimes just to make people feel heard. Like, even if I can't do anything for them, by the time that they get to the point that they have figured out how to file a complaint against someone, even if you can't do something, they need someone to say, yeah, I hear you. And that's terrible what happened to you or whatever. So again, I realize I'm being a little long-winded and I'm sorry for that, but I think it's really important to say, I don't think it's about winning. I think it's about doing the right thing. I guess I said that 3 minutes ago, but whatever.
No. That makes sense. And that gives us good insight into that too. So when a case ends up to the point where it's in court or needs a lawyer, I'm guessing that's kind of a whole nother level, right? So once it gets that far, what is the process and procedure that you and the healthcare professional need to go through to get that license back?
Well, so there's 2 things that happen. So when, and it's not automatic that the practitioner is going to lose their license. I mean, that's not automatic. Sure, in some cases, yes. In Indiana, we have what is called a summary suspension, which is like an emergency suspension. So what that is here in Indiana is it is a non-final order where the Attorney General would file a petition for summary suspension, alleging that the person poses a clear and immediate danger to the public if they are allowed to continue to practice. And so, for instance, let's say a pill mill case, okay? So you have a doctor or a nurse practitioner or even a pharmacy that is a pill mill. Well, those cases take a very long time to investigate, right? You have to get the what we call here inspect, the database that the pharmacy has, that,
The PMP.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. You got to get that for the practitioner and for the patients, and then there's just so much that goes into it. You got to get the medical records for the patients. I mean, it can take over a year, right? And particularly, at least here in Indiana, there's not a whole police department doing it. Sometimes you might have the DEA, but and sometimes the complaint might come from the police, but generally it doesn't. I mean, generally, at least when I was there, you figured it out. Like, boy, we're getting a lot of complaints about this person. And then so, all right. So in that instance, you don't want that practitioner to continue to practice and pose a risk to patients if they continue to practice. So basically you're saying to the board, listen, we don't have enough to do something right now, but we would like, a summary suspension of this practitioner's license. And in Indiana, it goes for 90 days and then you have to renew it. The other time that might happen is if the practitioner has criminal charges pending. Because in that situation, and I feel like I didn't really answer your question, but in that situation, if they have criminal charges pending, they're very limited in what they can say in their response to the investigation because their Fifth Amendment right is still there, right? And so it's you don't want to get out ahead of the criminal case because the burden of proof is higher. So sometimes if a person has criminal charges pending, sometimes they would file a petition for a summary suspension until the criminal charges are resolved, and then you'll know one way or the other what has to happen. Okay, so there's a couple of different things about that process. So generally what happens is, and this is not just in Indiana, an informal complaint is filed, whether in your state, if it's the board, or in Indiana, it would be with the Attorney General's office. The practitioner is notified that there has been a complaint. And you have an opportunity to respond to that complaint. I believe that you should have a lawyer in that situation. Now, obviously, I am a lawyer, so I'm a little biased, but you do want to be careful what you say because there might not be criminal charges already pending, but you don't want to trigger criminal charges to be pending, like saying, I did it. I stole a bunch of drugs, and here's how I did. I mean, you need to be cognizant of that. So I think that there is a way to say, here's my response, but not address, the ultimate issue, right, of diversion or whatever. So once the whoever it is that does that investigation, they're gonna investigate it. So let's say that it's a diversion allegation. The investigator is obviously going to take the response, but they're going to get the records from wherever the person is accused of diverting from, whether it's from the hospital. They're going to get the employment records. They might get patient records to say, did Susie Smith only need morphine when Nurse Steve was working that day. And they might get the Pyxis records and compare Pyxis records to how much did this person dispense, how many overrides did that person have, as opposed to every other person in the hospital. So they're going to get all of that. That takes time. At the completion of that investigation, then whether it's the staff of the board or the AG, they're going to make a decision about whether or not formal charges should be filed against the person's license. In Indiana, that is the first time anything, and I would imagine in other states, that's the first time anything is public. Prior to that, it is completely confidential. And the reason for that is because, at least when I was at the AG's, like 60% of the consumer complaints that came in were dismissed.
Huh.
Yeah, well, I think that's about what it was. I mean, I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like that's what it was. And the reason for that is because anybody can file a consumer complaint at any time, right? We have what I affectionately call Jerry Springer complaints, where you would have, may God rest his soul, poor Jerry Springer. But in any event, you might have ex-girlfriend file a complaint against ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend, right? There's nothing to it, but So, so that's why it's private. So when an actual formal complaint or that petition for summary suspension that I talked about is filed, that's when anything becomes public. What's going to happen then is that it goes like any other case. You can either settle it for an agreed disposition, or you can have a trial. It's at that point that if you agree to a suspension or you have a trial and the board decides to suspend the license, that's when you start talking about getting the license back. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it sounds like one of the things I was going to ask you is, when should somebody engage a lawyer? And it sounds like it's when the licensing board reaches out to you and says there's been a complaint filed, before you even respond to them. I didn't do it, or what's it about? That's what your recommendation would be.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. What about if somebody is working at a healthcare facility and they do have a substance use disorder and they are diverting and they know it, they haven't been found out yet, or at least they don't think they've been found out yet, and they've decided that they want help and they want to confess and go to their employer and tell them, and I need some leave, I need to go to recovery. I guess they could just not say anything to the employer. They could just say, I need some leave. That probably would be the best thing, I would guess.
I think you're right.
But if they did say something, or if they're hearing that the facility is onto them, they've got a tip, and they've decided now that they are going to go confess and say, I need help, would you suggest that they engage a lawyer before they open their mouth at that point?
Well, there's two things: whether the person is going to confess or they're pulled off the floor and brought into the dreaded room when you walk in and HR is there and loss prevention is there and all that. It's a really tough call. I used to say, I don't know that I actually used to say, to go, go ahead and confess, because then you're being honest and that will help you later. But I have recently had several cases where the person did exactly what you're talking about. Okay. They did go in, they had a great relationship with their supervisor. They told their supervisor what was going on. Sometimes the supervisor said, I kind of suspected, right? But the concern is what happens after that. So, I have a case, you and I were recently talking about this. I have a case right now where I have a nurse who did just that. Went to, said, I need help. Went to a facility here in Indiana called Parkdale, where I believe it's run by Rainbow Garcia. I think you've done a podcast with him. He's a wonderful, amazing person. But went there, but then the consumer complaint was filed, and ultimately that person has criminal charges pending in 2 counties, and it is it's being prosecuted by Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, and instead of by the local prosecutor. sometimes that can happen. And so that client has been doing everything right for 2 years, and that client has remained sober, and did inpatient, did IOP, did aftercare, has done everything they can. And I think, that client is now looking at a felony conviction. And if it's a felony conviction, then that client, it's a mandatory exclusion from Medicaid and Medicare, from the Department of Homeland Security. A felony conviction will very often, unless paperwork gets lost, right? Unless you get super lucky.
So they're done. They're done in terms of practicing medicine.
5 years, yeah.
Okay, 5 years. Okay.
Yeah, if the person has a felony conviction that relates to controlled substances, it is a mandatory exclusion for 5 years.
Okay.
However, a misdemeanor conviction is a permissive exclusion, meaning they don't have to be excluded. You would have the same process of having the opportunity to respond and all of that. But it's only 3 years. Okay. So,
so is it safe to assume this particular client, was they admitted, so you would think that would count for them, but they're still in trouble, and obviously fraud in terms of charting, I'm guessing, right? Was what they did over and above so egregious, or is this what happens anytime there's charting fraud, if that's what's going on? In this case, is this pretty much what you would expect to see for anything that involves?
One of my frustrations is that there is a lack of consistency, at least from my perspective. Okay. What I have seen, and it depends on, as far as criminal charges go. Of course, not in every case is the person criminally charged, right? Sometimes, right, it doesn't go to that level. But in cases where there is a criminal charge, my client is really at the mercy of that county prosecutor, or if the county prosecutor referred the case back to the Attorney General Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, and they have certain policy decisions. So I have had clients who are in similar situations, and some of them have gone to drug treatment court, where if they, they're in a very intensive program, it's like super intense probation and super intense aftercare, where they're screening and, all of this to help them with their sobriety. And if at the end of whatever the period of time is, they have completed the program successfully, their case is dismissed, completely dismissed. But then I have other cases that are very similar, and that person is facing a felony conviction and at least the end of their career for 5 years, unless we can, after a year, get it reduced to a misdemeanor. So it's very frustrating, because the other thing that is so difficult is that when someone is new into sobriety, and hopefully, and full disclosure, I don't have a substance use disorder, but I know people who do, obviously, and I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night, but whatever, okay. So the young kids don't get that joke, but look at it, Google it. So, but anyways, I completely lost my train of thought. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, the consistency and lack of consistency.
Right. And they're completely at the mercy of of that prosecutor. So I hope.
So I wonder, I wonder if those prosecutors are the ones that believe they have to win at all costs, have no insight into,
I don't know. And sometimes I think it comes from, higher ups policy and, and federal funding policy. And I mean, I don't know the answer. And certainly, I do have to preface the whole thing by saying these are just, my opinions, but, and frustrations that I see on this end. I know what I was going to say now, but it's, certainly any prosecutor absolutely has prosecutorial discretion. I mean, they can do whatever they want. And it's their, electorate who needs to be informed and decide if they think those policies are right. Right. So, they most certainly have the right to prosecute or not prosecute and offer some kind of a make a plea offer or not make a plea offer. That is their right. It's my job as the defense attorney to try to protect my client's interests as best I can. Now, what I was going to say before is that, when my clients are new into sobriety, or even if they're not, the accountability is a big part, and honesty is a big part of getting sober. And so it's a challenge because, well, what does that person say? What do they reveal? They have to balance their needs for, if they're working steps, because for years, by the time somebody comes to me, well, that's really not true. Most of the time, though, they've been struggling for a long time.
Yes.
And sometimes not. Sometimes, as I'm sure you know, it happens that fast, right? It's 4 months. They ended up with 10 years of addiction in 4 months or something, right? But they've been lying and manipulating others and hiding things for so long that coming clean feels good. But unfortunately, our legal system may not have.
You're like, don't say anything.
Right. That's another reason that I think have a lawyer, because let me take that off your plate.
That makes sense. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, the need to get it off. Like, I've been caught. Phew, okay, let me get it off my chest. But don't say anything that's going to incriminate you and end up in trouble.
Correct.
Okay.
And so it's a very fine line. And, and that's why I say let the lawyer worry about that. You dump it all out on the lawyer, right? Well, then it's up to them to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And now I have a client where something happened where this client has been sober for years now, but there's a different issue that came up. It's completely separate, and it's kind of a one-off sort of a thing. And I called that person and I said, how do you want to handle this? Because I know this is the conflict for you, but as a lawyer, I need to let you make this decision. And that client said, well, I need to be doing the next right thing. I need to be doing the next right thing. And I said, well, you think about it and then get back to me, It's
if you do the confession right thing. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Okay. Are you finding that facilities are also being held accountable for diversion type related incidences? They allow, some hospitals I think have, fabulous programs, and we can't prevent everything. So we do our best to mitigate, and then we do our best to catch things right away if it happens. And so things, get through. But other hospitals, they're not even looking. So are you finding that facilities are being held accountable in any way when one of these cases comes forward?
I don't know that I actually am the best person to ask for that, because I represent practitioners. I don't represent hospitals. Okay. So
you're not really hearing about something else that might be going on related to the case.
Not really, no. I
Okay.
know that, yeah, no, you know,
Okay.
hospitals are going to be represented by some huge firm, right? And I
Right.
am not that. So, and I don't want to be that. So,
Yeah.
I don't.
And that's not part of your strategy to say, hey, let's split the responsibility here. We need to bring the facility.
Yeah, I mean, there are times that I'm like, are you kidding me? How was this allowed to go on for so long?
Okay. Yeah.
And particularly when I was at the AG's, there was a case there that I was shocked by. But in Indiana, the AG doesn't investigate the hospital. It's I think the Department of Health does it. So it's but pharmacies, right? So if they're the pharmacy within the hospital, the AG would investigate. But again, those are going to be investigated by or represented by large.
Right.
So, and I'm not. It's just me. And
yeah.
So
is there anything you mentioned? All of the things that the process that they would go through, getting all the automated dispensing machine records and medical records and all of that kind of stuff. Is there anything that you find yourself wishing that the people or person in charge of gathering all that evidence that led to the suspicion and started this whole ball rolling had included in that information from your perspective when it comes to the defense side? Whenever I'm doing an audit, I try to be as non-biased as possible. If I'm finding something in the data that is like, ooh, that's bad, but then also, everybody else is doing this, or they also do this sometimes, that is good. I mean, it's not bad. And I try to just put that whole thing together. So is there anything that you find yourself wishing, man, I wish they had done this, or going back and asking, hey, can you give us this information or tell us this?
What the biggest thing that I find is that the person investigating often does not have any idea what it's really like on the floor.
Oh, okay.
And so I have had several cases, and I have to apologize. I'm getting over laryngitis that I can't believe I still have, and so I'm a little self-conscious of it. But
it's just your sexy voice.
Brenda Vaccaro, also something the kids don't know. But there's a disconnect. We hear about the nursing shortage. I'm not convinced there's a nursing shortage. I think that there is a lack of will to pay nurses. And so what I see are incredibly overworked nurses, particularly during COVID, who have, 6 highly acute patients, and they're running all over trying to care for them. They don't have time to go to the bathroom. They don't have time to eat, right? And so if you don't have time to go to the bathroom, guess what? You might not chart everything that needs to be charted. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, critical for loss prevention or diversion investigators to understand. Go do a ride-along, which someone called that, to me. They said it the other day that they're doing ride-alongs now.
Yeah.
Go see what it's really like on the floor, so that you can really understand, is this a charting error?
Right.
Or is this diversion?
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's where the partnership with the nurse manager comes in really handy too. But you have to be able to trust the nurse manager that it's not just a whole bias thing and they refuse to see it, but that they're really giving you an accurate assessment of, oh yeah, no, this is reality.
But sometimes the nurse manager's hands can be tied.
Okay.
Because most, in my experience, the nurse manager knows that the nurse is completely overworked. And, I believe it's still the case in Indiana. I could be wrong, that we don't have nurse to patient ratios.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's still the case. And so, if I can't imagine that the nurse manager is like, oh no, it's fine. You can take care of,
Yeah.
7 highly acute patients by yourself.
Yeah. Well, you got to do what you got to do with the people you have.
6 months, right? And so I would imagine that the nurse manager has already been thinking the same thing, but you know what? The nurse manager wants to keep their job too.
Yeah, I can't say it out loud.
Only so much that, sure, they can tell their supervisors, hey, we need more staff, we need more staff, we need more staff. Yeah, well, tell me something I didn't know.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a larger problem. I mean, that's a systemic problem.
Yeah. That's a good, and I guess that's something important for those doing the investigation to understand what their ratios and what all of that is in their state too, because that plays into how you approach things. Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. All right.
And that's the other thing that really bugs me. Okay.
Tell me.
That we have these signs outside the hospitals. Heroes work here. Oh, the first responders. We have it's National Nurses Week, right? That's lip service. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
If we're not going to support the nurses,
yeah,
right, and instead say, well, here's more. Oh, you injured your back moving a client, and now you have all these problems, right? That's all lip service, and it frankly makes me crazy.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I agree with you. We need to take care of our people.
Why are they heroes, right? Why do we say that? We say that because they're the incredible stress they're under, how hard they're working, their physical, the impact on their bodies, the trauma that they see,
and they keep on going
out. Right? Yeah. Particularly again during COVID, where they were not only the nurse, but they had to be family. They had to sit there and watch people die by themselves. I'm about to cry. It's awful. But yet, when that nurse succumbs to the very stress that they are put under repeatedly, and that manifests in a substance use disorder, we say, well, guess what?
Yeah.
See ya. Now you're on the OIG exclusion use list, and you can't practice where Medicaid or Medicare. Really?
Right.
Really? You screw it. You're going to get a felony conviction. What?
Yeah.
That just seems so fundamentally wrong to me. Look, and I'm also not saying that people should get a pass.
Right.
Obviously, they should not get a pass. Okay? Did they break the law? Yes. Did they, in theory, put patients at risk because of possibly, okay? Did they do? Absolutely. But the people but if they're doing what they need to do, and they have gone to treatment, and they're working their program, and they're doing what they need to do, guess what? They already know they did something wrong.
Right.
They're already paying the price because their lives have been turned upside down because they left their families for a month to go to treatment. Then they did IOP for 6 weeks, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right? Then they have aftercare. Then they're going to 3 meetings every single week at least, right? And a lot of these people have kids. And, and they have basketball practice and soccer and ballet and all of this. Well, you try to figure out how to navigate that while you have to go to 3 meetings a week, plus go to therapy. And your drug screens if you're in recovery monitoring agreement, right? You try to figure that out.
Yeah, and kick the disease. I mean, they've got all that going on.
So, and again, I'm not saying they should get off scot-free. They shouldn't. They should be put on probation for violating the Nurse Practice Act. They should be, if there's a criminal prosecution, we don't have a better mechanism for that at this point, right? And they did break the law. Okay. But I think there has to be some balance in the fact that these people put themselves on the front lines every single day. And when they succumb and they see things that I could only imagine, right? I mean, someone that I know recently just had a compound fracture in their arm, and somebody tells me that, and I'm like, ugh, right? I mean, I can't even imagine looking at somebody's bone sticking out of their arm, right? So the trauma that these people are engaged, see every single day, and they succumb to that, and it just doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Accountability with compassion.
I love that.
So.
I love that. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's can I use that?
You can use that. Yes. Yeah. No, it's right though. You need them both. I mean, not scot-free, but not ruin their lives. I mean, let's throw some compassion and mercy in there. And
some people got it, right? Some people, they did it and they went to drug treatment court and they're now, so that's what seems so unfair.
Yeah. Right. Not consistent, and it's kind of a crapshoot, it sounds like, what you're going to end up with.
Exactly.
Do you have any suggestions or things that you would like to say to those involved in the intervention of a suspected diversion case? You're going in, you're going to face this person and sit them down and, ask them those pointed questions. Is there anything that you want to say to those that are involved in that intervention?
Well, from a legal perspective, I guess it's exactly what we just said. Just exercise compassion.
Okay. Yeah.
And the other thing here is that at least one of the hospitals here in Indiana, they have a great EAP program, and they're great about second chances and rehiring the person,
okay.
And obviously monitoring them and all of that. And I so appreciate that facility.
Yeah.
But I think, and of course, you can't do that in every situation, right?
Right.
I mean, I understand that. So it's one size doesn't really fit all, and so I don't know that I really have anything other than that, just to compassion. Because again, nobody thought, oh yeah, I went to school to get my nursing license or my pharmacy license and all of this, and and I'm going to end up with a substance use. Nobody wanted that.
Right.
So,
yeah, agreed. Okay. All right. Well, all of this was great, and I can only imagine that your clients are in good hands. You're very passionate about what you do, and so I think they're in good hands. Some of it's out of your control, obviously, but I can see you giving everything you've got to every case that you have. So thank you for the work that you do and for taking the time today to talk with me. It was very insightful.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Very much.
I want to thank our sponsor. You can learn more about IMI at imiweb.com, where you can see their complete line of innovative tamper-evident products, including their industry-leading line of tamper-evident caps, which have become an industry standard for guarding drug delivery containers, such as IV, oral, and NFIT syringes, IV bags, and medication cassettes. Thank you all for listening, and thank you again, Laura.
Thank you.